Now, colleagues, we have our guests from Karamoja who have come here. And you remember the report we had started on yesterday. But we also have the report from ROP. I think it would be courteous enough to complete that report of the committee. Those are going back to Karamoja. And they've come to specifically listen to the presentation of this report. So the report for the street children, chair of the committee, please come.
Number 7, motion for adoption of the report of the Committee of Gender, Labour and Social Development on a motion for resolution of Parliament urging government to respond to the plight of Karamajong children enslaved in street begging and child labor.
So, Chair, present your report.
Thank you very much, Right Honorable Speaker. Right Honorable Speaker, I already laid the minutes and the report yesterday. And yesterday we had gone up to page 5. We had finished the introduction and the background.
Let's resume from page 5. From where
we shall go from page 5, yes, Right Honorable Speaker, where I was talking about the table where the Ministry of Gender submitted by Uganda to the United Nations that paints a picture of the number of street children that have been withdrawn over years. And as a committee, we put a disclaimer that while these figures give an indication of the children rescued, they neither reveal the actual number of children on the street, nor state their districts of origin, or whether the same children are not being retrafficked. Right Honorable Speaker, I request the members to go with me to page 7, where as a committee we observed that the absence of reliable data affects proper planning, resource allocation, programming, and the designing of appropriate interventions, and makes it difficult, leaving these children in a limbo practically. The dearth of the statistics is made worse, partly due to the laborious process of obtaining a birth certificate, and that the lack of reliable statistics is also an indictment against the government for failure to notice some of its most vulnerable human beings. Right Honorable Speaker, on page 8, we have our observations to that effect. The committee recommends that the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development and the Uganda National Bureau of Statistics carry out an audit of all street children in the country periodically, starting from within 12 months from the date of adoption of this report. That the Ministry of Internal Affairs, through the police, should investigate, arrest, and prosecute child traffickers. That the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the National Identification and Registration Authority put in place measures to ease the process of acquiring birth certificates as a means of identity, nationality, and citizenship. Right Honorable Speaker, on 5.2, it is worthy to note that the phenomenon of migration from Karamoja is not entirely new. Over the years, Karamoja has moved to other parts of the country in search of opportunities, especially when harvests were poor. Many went to work in big plantations in Kachira, Lugazi, Masindi, and on small family plantations in other parts of the country, particularly those near Karamoja, especially Teso, Lango, and Bunyoro. And these were mostly men and adult men, and this particular kind of migration was dignified and not forced, and people went back home after regular periods, much different from the mass movement of children and young people as is the practice nowadays. Right Honorable Speaker, we cited push factors to this effect, and we are citing limited social services as one of the push factors, and our recommendations on page 10 are that the committee recommends that government through the Ministry of Education and Sports, A, should construct more primary and secondary schools and technical policy of having a primary school in every parish, a secondary school in every sub-county, and subsidize them in order to attract more learners. B, ensure compulsory free boarding education for all schools in Karamoja, at least up to senior 4. C, Provide meals for all learners in all schools in Karamoja. D, construct more vocational and technical schools in Karamoja to contain the returnees from the streets and the dropouts who may require the skilling. On insecurity, Right Honorable Speaker, our recommendation is on page 11. And we recommend that the government should scale up efforts to address insecurity and long-term planning and expenditure framework. On famine and hunger, Right Honorable Speaker, page 12, we recommend that the Ministry of Karamoja Affairs prioritize Karamoja in all different development projects and encourage participation of the local population. B, that the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industries and Fisheries should implement projects in Karamoja that employ technologies such as irrigation schemes to increase food production and greenhouses and community dams. C, the Office of the Prime Minister should urgently put in place measures to provide regular and adequate supply of food relief for Karamoja, and of course, also food reserves. On the push factor on poverty, alcoholism, drug abuse, and gender-based violence, Right Honorable Speaker, our recommendation is on page 14, and the recommendations are: the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development should, 1, prioritize Karamoja regardless of all efforts to combat gender-based violence, including the construction of gender-based violence shelters and youth skilling centers with toolkits. 2, implement affirmative action with regard to all poverty alleviation programs in Karamoja, including the parish development model. 3, create awareness and sensitization about the dangers of alcoholism and involve the local communities in all the activities carried out. And B, the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development should increase the availability of microfinance for income generating activities for all districts in Karamoja. Right Honorable Speaker, on the connivance by parents, the committee found that parents and caregivers were heavily involved in the trafficking of children from Karamoja to different towns in the country. The committee interacted with some youth at Koblin Youth Skilling Center who had been rescued from various towns, including Kenya. Right Honorable Speaker, the committee was concerned that during the interactions with the local council 1 executive members from NAPAC, men seemed unconcerned about child trafficking, indicating that it was the women who were responsible for all the matters relating to their children. The women take care of the home, including meeting all needs and engage in business, while men looked after animals and took little interest in the affairs of children. Our recommendation, Right Honorable Speaker, on page 15 is the A, Ministry of Internal Affairs through the Uganda Police should investigate all cases of traffickers and prosecute all those parents or caregivers that connive or conspire to traffic their children. The women take care of the home, including meeting all needs and engage in business, while men looked after animals and took little interest in the affairs of children. Our recommendation, Right Honorable Speaker, on page 15 is the A, Ministry of Internal Affairs through the Uganda Police should investigate all cases of traffickers and prosecute all those parents or caregivers that connive or conspire to traffic their children. B, the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development should create awareness among local governments about their responsibilities regarding the welfare and protection of their children. Right Honorable Speaker and colleagues, the pull factors we looked at were the porous borders and the traffickers, and our recommendation to that effect is the Ministry of Internal Affairs through the police should increase deployment in Karamoja and investigate, arrest, and prosecute B, Parliament should increase the budget for the Ministry of Internal Affairs to cater for recruitment of more personnel to effectively patrol borders of the districts with high incidence of child trafficking. C, the Ministry of Internal Affairs should have closer working relations with districts with high incidences of child trafficking to ensure uncoordinated work regarding interception of trafficked children. Right Honorable Speaker, we looked at the frameworks that we as a country have developed ourselves and those to which we are signed and ratified that are used to mitigate, reduce, and eliminate the vice of children being trafficked. Right Honorable Speaker, we looked at the Orphans and Vulnerable Children's Policy 2004 and Alternative Care Framework. We looked at Withdrawal and Prevention of Street Children Strategy 2008, Street Children Action Plan 2018, and Right Honorable Speaker, the street children received annually at camping table below, and the setting up of Koblin Youth Skills Training Center. And when the committee visited the training center, Right Honorable Speaker, it noted a number of shortcomings, a lack of fence, and that this absence of the fence critically gives the children that have been returned leeway to be re-trafficked and the temptation to return to where they had come from. And so the absence of this fence poses a security risk to the inhabitants. 2, inadequate and inappropriate structures. There are insufficient structures to decently accommodate all the inhabitants, and a number of the structures are made of iron sheets. They are makeshift. There was inadequate sanitation facilities, and the very many numbers of children we found there were using almost 3 stanzas of toilets. There was no electricity. While the institution does provide training to various youth in various areas, the youth stay at the center for a short time. The youth and the principal of the center noted that this time was too short for the learners to perfect skills being taught. The committee was also informed that the training was hampered by the lack of startup kits and for the graduates, making it difficult for them to practice the skills and live sustainably. In a number of cases, many of the youth returned to the streets out of frustration or getting re-trafficked. Dwelling Places, which is one of the NGOs working with children in a park, provides some startup kits for graduates and pays some rent for 1 month for each of them, but this was very inadequate. And Right Honorable Speaker, we also looked at the Interministerial Task Force on the Street Children, and we know that the Cabinet in 2019 established an Interministerial Task Force on Street Children. The task force, which is made up of ministries, Gender, Prime Minister's Office, Ministry Karamoja, Ministry Internal Affairs, Ministry Local Government, Ministry Justice, Constitutional Affairs, Ministry of Finance, and Cabinet also directed that the Ministry of Gender to support local governments to implement national parenting guidelines, enactment of bylaws, and mainstreaming of vulnerable families in government programs as a means of preventing children from going to the street. Right Honorable Speaker, we also looked at the Coordination Office for Trafficking in Persons, the National Task Force Against Trafficking in Persons, and the National Children's Authority. We looked at the National Child Policy 2020, and our observations, Right Honorable Speaker, on page 20, are that the interventions of government are welcome and should go a long way in ensuring the rights of children, including preventing them from finding their way onto the street. However, the phenomenon has instead increased, necessitating government to invest in addressing the root causes, as is highlighted in the children. The various interventions are well-intentioned. They have not fetched the desired results and have placed no significant dent in the problem of the street children because they have either not been implemented or have been poorly implemented. Right Honorable Speaker, on page 21, we are looking at even where the strategies have been implemented, some of the approaches employed have been questionable and have produced unwanted consequences. The withdrawal of children from the streets, for example, Right Honorable Speaker, is constantly brutally carried out. And many of the children are bundled up and pushed on the trucks to Kampiringisa, and some have always ended up back on the streets. Moreover, Right Honorable Speaker, Kampiringisa is a juvenile detention, and these children are not in conflict with the law. That is not to mention the sorry state of the far more inhabitants than it was meant to, leading to overcrowding. The very act of taking street children to Kampiringisa in a brutal manner is an indication that government had not planned well for street children, because other than Koblin Youth Skilling Training Center, there is no specific institution meant to rehabilitate these street children. So the committee recommends, Right Honorable Speaker, that the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development establishes regional reception centers for children that require protection and security in a phased manner, starting with the financial year 23-24. 2, increase the operational budget for and renovate, retool, and expand Koblin Youth Skilling Center and Kampiringisa Juvenile Detention. 3, prioritize Koblin's Youth Skilling Center in the implementation of all projects by the ministry, including the Green Jobs and Fair Labor Market Program. Provide these youths trained from there with toolkits and enable them establish enterprises after leaving the center. 4, construct industrial cottages in Karamoja sub-region to enable the youth get workspaces after rehabilitation. Right Honorable Speaker, we saw in Napak some construction, similarly a cottage industry that has spent now close to 2 years as a white elephant, that would actually house these young people trained from Koblin to work or transit into the service sector. 5, expedite the completion of the gender-based rehabilitation center in Moroto that has spent now 5 years under construction. And Right Honorable Speaker, we would also require accountability and authentic audit on that construction in Moroto that was meant to be a gender-based rehabilitation center that has spent now 5 years without completion. B, the Ministry of Local Government should increase the budget allocation for probation and social welfare officers to enable them reach all families with vulnerable children. Parliament should allocate funds to the Ministry of Internal Affairs to facilitate the Child and Family Protection Unit of Uganda Police and to make it more effective. And the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development to fully implement all the strategies to end child trafficking and the phenomenon of street children. D, all ministry street children should, 1, involve local communities and involve male parents or caregivers in developing and implementing strategies to combat child trafficking and address the challenge of street children. 2, adopt a right-based approach to dealing with street children. 3, develop and implement strategies that include dealing with street children with. Right Honorable Speaker, on page 23, where the further recommendations are: review the withdrawal and prevention of street children strategy of 2008, and E, the ministries under the Interministerial Task Force on Street Children should strengthen collaboration with local authorities in Karamoja and urban centers to ensure that there are coordinated efforts in rescuing children following proper procedure. Right Honorable Speaker, we reviewed the legal framework for trafficking in persons in Uganda, the domestic legislations like the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda. We also reviewed the Children's Act, CAP 59. We reviewed the Prevention of Trafficking in Persons Act 2009. We reviewed the Employment Act 2006. We reviewed the Local Governments Act, CAP 243. We also reviewed the Education Act 2008. The international legislations we reviewed were the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the African Charter on Rights and Welfare of the Child, the International Labour Organization, ILO, Worst Forms of Labor, Convention 182, and our observations were as follows. The committee observes that Uganda has a formidable legal framework for the protection of children. While the legal framework is strong, the challenges in the implementation of the law mean that ultimately the protection that the law aims to bring about is still elusive. The number of cases related to child protection is ridiculously low. Say nothing about the problem within the justice, law and order sector generally. These problems include the poor remuneration of police officers, corruption, and understaffing of especially the police and the judiciary. And of course, Right Honorable Speaker, the non-operationalization of the National Children's Authority, 2015. The committee further observes that the legal provisions, for example, under Local Governments Act, are not implemented due to inadequate financing. While Local Government Act provides that matters of welfare, probation, and street children are the responsibility of local governments, the meager resources allocated to local governments to these services mean that there is very little that can be done. We also note that while the vice chairpersons of village and parish executive committees are responsible for the welfare of children, the provision has not been implemented, partly because the local governments are not aware of this legal provision or its implementation. Lastly, while the Local Government Act empowers local governments to legislate bylaws and ordinances, this power has not been well exercised in relation to preventing the phenomenon of street ordinance preventing the trafficking of children. Our recommendation is A, the Ministries of Justice and Constitutional Affairs and Internal Affairs should fill the staffing gaps for prosecutors, state attorneys, and judicial officers, and police personnel respectively, especially in areas where higher numbers of trafficking are, such as Karamajong. The Ministries of Justice and Constitutional Affairs should provide tailor-made training for all stakeholders, including police personnel, judicial officers, prosecutors, probation and social welfare officers dealing with children and or trafficked persons. C, the Ministry of Local Government should induct all local council executives and continuously sensitize them about responsibilities contained in the law. D, local governments should make adequate budget allocations for matters relating to the welfare of the children. In conclusion, Right Honorable Speaker and honorable members, the problem of street children is intricately linked to trafficking in persons and abuse of human rights, including sexual exploitation and forced labor. The vast majority of street children come from Karamajong, but every region in Uganda is represented among the street children. Right Honorable Speaker, in every urban center, the number of street children in every urban center, the bigger number is the indigenous tribes, and Karamajong makes the second, even in Kampala here. Actually, when you see people with dark skins, you think they are from Karamajong, when they are also from Central and they are simply dark skinned. Right Honorable Speaker, sadly, there are no reliable statistics to provide a basis for a long-term solution. Many of the children transition into adulthood and even have children of their own while on the streets. We have even started registering adults on the streets, parents following children to the streets. So instead of street children, now we have even adults. The very presence of people living on the street is in itself a huge indictment against the conscience of government and all Ugandans. Failure to concretely address the challenge of street children will significantly impair the attainment of the country's set goals in the National Development Plan 3 and hamstring the aspirations set by the Agenda 2030 and numerous sustainable development goals, because these require us to take care of our most vulnerable in the society, leaving no one behind. It is critical to address the reasons that force children onto the streets, which require proper planning and implementation, and of course, addressing the challenges of urbanization. Right, Honorable Speaker and Honorable Members, I beg to move that the motion for a resolution of Parliament urging government to respond to the plight of Karamajong children enslaved in street begging and child labor be adopted by the House, and that this report too be adopted by the Honorable House. I beg to move.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the detailed report. Colleagues, the issues are very, very clear. I will still have other items, so we are going to have a limited debate of only 10 minutes on this matter. I pick Karamoja and the colleague, and then Faith Nakut. Colleagues, if you know you've spoken, please, you know I won't pick you.
Right, Honorable, thank you for the opportunity. I request an extra minute. Since I moved the motion, there are recommendations that are missing.
Honorable, 2 minutes, please.
Okay. The recommendations that I wish to add, in addition to thanking the committee for an excellent job. One, to establish a database, the Ministry of Gender can work with the existing LC1s to do a quick register of all children so they can know who is missing. The other is for the traffic children of school-going age, the Ministry of Education should gazette a school so that they can be repatriated to a school rather than being dumped in Koglin. Then the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development should do guidelines for rescue and resettlement. What the development partners are doing now is not guided by anything. That's why you see the children coming back. They need guidelines on how the children can be removed and taken back. The KCCA signed an MOU with Napak district recently. My request, so that the children who are here in Kampala now can be resettled home peacefully. Right, Honorable Speaker, there are two others. The economically vulnerable families whose children are in the street should be targeted for the upcoming government programs. Then the traffickers, even institutional traffickers, should be targeted, not only the individuals, so that they are.
Thank you. I'll break my own rules, which I usually use, because Honorable Bigger Rules have just come, but she has been an activist in that area. And despite being in hospital, she came out because of this matter. So let me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank you. I want to thank the Office of the Speaker for personally checking on me, and to you, my dear friends, from NRM to opposition. Everyone was concerned and you reached out to me. I thank you. I forever am indebted to you. Mr. Speaker, I served at a district level as Secretary for Gender and Governance, Local Government, Arua. I would propose, first of all, I want to thank the Committee of Gender, where you first designated me up, then we drew me to go to legal. Mr. Speaker, with real heartfelt pain on behalf of the social doctors at sub-county and at district level, I would propose that these people should be empowered with motorcycles. They should be given money. These are the people who can reach out to these children, counsel them, counsel parents to honor and respect their children and keep their children with themselves and value children. Otherwise, I join the rest in thanking the committee for this report. Thank you for giving me this chance.
Thank you. Honorable Wasariwa, you had a procedure matter? Yes. It's cross-cutting, so. allow you.
Right, Honourable Speaker, on the issue of the report, one of the issues raised by the committee relates to ordinances in these districts. And there was an issue that I think only one district has an ordinance to do with the children. Right, Honourable Speaker, I want to observe, and now that my brother, the Honourable Norbert Mao, is in that ministry, one of the challenges is that these districts are making ordinances. They are submitted to the office of the Solicitor General because these ordinances must be approved before they are implemented. Unfortunately, they take years in the office of the Attorney General. They take years. So one of the issues, Right Honourable Speaker, that must be addressed is the Ministry of Justice to hasten, to fasten the process of clearing these ordinances so that they are taken back and they are implemented. The habit of keeping them at the tables is something that is also affecting the implementation and also the effectiveness of these ordinances on the ground.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Honorable Minister of Justice wanted to comment on the same.
Thank you, Right Honorable Speaker. I would like to thank the chairperson and the committee members for the elaborate report. And of course, not forgetting the mover of the motion, Honorable Nakut, who raised that motion. Right Honorable Speaker, as a ministry, we have a comprehensive strategic plan on how to trace, rehabilitate, and resettle these street children. I love the way each time the issues of street children come up, everybody comes up in arms. Right Honorable Speaker, would do much if the funds were available, because this strategic plan is there. And I love what my colleague, the LOP, has said. My predecessor had tabled a very good plan. And out of the 5 billion that she requested, only 1 billion was released. And since that time, we have not received any other funds. This financial year, in our budget, we have 140 million for the whole financial year. This quarter, they have released only 10 million. As I speak now, the way you have said that there are children who were collected in Koblin, as I speak now, we have 216 children that we are feeding, we are rehabilitating within that 10 million. And remember that this Koblin Youth Institute was and of course now the youth have nowhere to train from because children. Right Honorable Speaker, on the issue of the street children, yes, you're talking about the traffickers. And I would like to thank the police in Karamoja because they have tried. The last time I was there 2 months ago, they had arrested 20 traffickers, and they had been paraded in court. That shows they are working. But the whole problem, it all goes back to the parents. If we do not address the issue of parents, in the report, they said that we are supposed to disseminate the parenting guidelines, which we have done in Napak and Amdat. But I think the whole issue is around mindset. The whole issue is around mindset. They know that if I come to Kampala, there is some little money I'm going to get, and at home we shall improve. So the best way, much as we are thinking of putting there a lot of money, is talking about the issues, the problems they have, before we deal with the issue of mindset. Right, Honorable Speaker, as I speak now, we do not have only children. You have seen even the women. You have seen the women. And what is funny is that the men are sending the women to collect money every month
the woman has to send home some money. So you can see that the whole problem is around mindset. And we need to address that.
But Honorable Minister, now it's the government, you know the problem. Okay? You know the problem. We have, in fact, also contributed to the knowledge you had, but it seems the issue is government doesn't want to address this concern. Because how do you give 10 million to address such a concern? In a whole quarter. Because we did our work as parliament of appropriating.
Right, Honorable Speaker. Yes, the economy is not doing well, but even
10 million?
You appropriated 120 million for the whole financial year. And I remember we had tabled that we want the 5 billion so that we are able to do something, so that we are able to construct Koblin, because they are in temporary shelters. It's not a permanent structure. There is no fence. So that's why at times we take them there. If they get an opportunity, they escape. So, Right Honorable Speaker, the whole thing is, if we address the issue of finance, if we address the issue of mindset, and of course the issue of the traffickers, Right Honorable Speaker, I think with our comprehensive strategic plan in place, we'll be able to address all the issues that have been raised, working together with the relevant ministries.
A question to the motion, because this is a report of Parliament urging government to respond to the plight of Karamajong children enslaved in street begging and child labor. Those in favor say aye, those against say nay. The ayes have it.